on our Season 2 leaderboard. Of course, after this tournament takes place, we update that. We take care of our Season 3 leaderboard. But for right now, all we care about is watching these two fantastic players play some Magic. Brian with a Sensei's Divine Top off an island. Jacob is going to fetch, go down to 19. We'll see what land he wants to get.
It's really fortunate that Brian has the turn 1 top on the play. That way he can dodge cards like Daze. The only way that would get off the table is if Jacob had the turn 1 Force of Will, which he did not have. As odd as it sounds, Divining Top puts pressure on Jacob in this matchup because once it's down, Brian has already established a certain level of inevitability.
Top is, as we have mentioned many times when watching Brian or anyone play Miracles, the engine that makes the card go. It's, you know, I don't like to say it's the best card in the deck, but it's certainly the most important.
Yeah, most important. And you remember, there's a lot of overlap between these blue, white, red, Stoneblade decks and Miracles. A lot of them playing the same permission spells. So what Brian can do with a basic mana base is he just slowly grinds advantage with this card, with his Divining Top.
It's time to spin the top here for Brian. You saw Wilson just play a copy of Misty Rainforest before passing the turn back. One thing I've noticed while covering this sort of match, you see Blue-White Red Delver versus Miracles, is that if you're Blue-White Red Delver, the Delver draw that these decks are infamous for, they do not get the job done. It is a long, grinded out affair every single time.
Blue-White Red Miracles is all about killing creatures. It establishes counter top lock. That's how it wins, but a lot of times, you know, these Delver decks play you know, kind of protect the queen strategy. They make one creature and try to keep it alive. It's really hard to do against Miracles. They have so much removal, so many ways to find their removal. You know, usually it becomes a late game affair.
Now, this is a card that does try to blink the removal. This is a copy of True Name Nemesis. Quite good against Jace and a couple other cards. However, we do know that Miracles has picked up a card like Council's Judgment, so they can take care of that with this as well. Of course, you can counter it before it actually does hit the table, so we might have a little battle over the 3/1 Merfolk.
Yeah, a lot of things Brian can do here. He does have 5 main deck answers to True Name Nemesis, which is pretty high for the format. He has 4 Terminus and a Council's Judgment. But that said, he's still going to want to fight a counter spell, a counter war over it. He's going to do it with counter spell.
Looks like this is where it's going to begin. My actual favorite artwork of Counterspell is now on the stack here, and we'll see if that can counter True Name Nemesis.
Yeah, I really like that. I think I'm with you. This is probably my favorite Counterspell artwork as well. I like how he's playing around Daze here. If Jacob wants to fight this counter war, he's going to have to use a Force of Will.
And he's going to have to remove the Daze that he did have. So Force of Will targeting Counterspell, removing Daze. Wilson will take 1 to do that. Goes down to 16. And Brian's going to spin the top right now. So he wants to take a look, and hey, there's a Terminus on top. That's rather convenient to get True Name Nemesis off of the table.
Yeah, so now he can concede the counter war, answer it on his own turn, and it's going to take another Force of Will, and maybe even further counter magic for Jacob to protect the True Name, which I don't think he's going to be able to do.
And Brian says, I would like to cast a Terminus to get this off of the table. So True Name will go to the bottom of the deck. Brian will play a land. It's a plane. Simply pass the turn back. So after a little counter exchange, Terminus is off of the table here. Excuse me, True Name is off the table due to Terminus, as Wilson's going to play a Wasteland, and we'll see if he'd like to fire that off or not.
Yeah, one of the strengths of Blue-White Miracles is the large quantity of basic lands the deck plays. You see right now, Brian not really very fazed by that Wasteland.
4 islands, 2 plains here in Brian's deck as far as basics are concerned. Sometimes you'll see versions of this deck, if you're Joe Lissette, they will play a mountain to facilitate their splash of red. For those blast effects, well, Brian only has those blast effects in the sideboard, and he's facilitating that through 2 copies of Volcanic Island. You see Vendilion click on the stack here. Wilson deciding what he wants to do about this. Does he want to daze it? Does he want to bolt it? Does he even really care about it?
I mean, I think he's probably pretty happy at the chance to get some value off this daze. The game's already starting to go pretty late. One of the things that Jacob has that's tougher right now for him is that he doesn't have any threats on the board. You know, you almost feel like he's getting locked out of this game right now as Brian untaps with lands, with a Divining Top, and an empty side on Jacob's board.
And the entire time, I think if you're Jacob, you're actually just scared of Counterbalance showing up to the party. It's not here yet, and Brian does need another blue as well, but finding another blue isn't difficult. It's just finding the card Counterbalance itself, and I imagine that's exactly what Brian's looking for. He's going to spin the top on his upkeep, take a draw. There's your other source of blue and Scalding Tarn. That'll also allow him to reset the top of his library if he's not too happy. So not a bad turn there from Brian, but as you mentioned, I think the most important thing here is that Wilson isn't being proactive. He's being very, very reactive. As we are being told right now that Greg Mitchell with Bug Delver, Star City Games Legacy Open champion when we were in Seattle earlier this year, up a game over Mark Rankin.
Yeah, and you're right, Jacob playing this reactively. It'll be interesting to see how well that goes. I can't imagine it's great for him. The thing which Blue White Miracles has is, first of all, it has Divining Top. We've already hammered home how good that is, but in a way, Counterbalance is the win condition in Brian's deck. So when he chooses to fight over win condition, it's a 2-mana spell. He can have a lot of extra cards in hand, a lot of extra mana. And because Jacob's Permission tends to be soft, not hard, Spell Pierces, Dazes, Brian can usually just wait and play this Counterbalance with a lot of extra mana up, which really shuts off Jacob's interaction.
So Wilson was just a land here. Brian going to cast a Stoneforge Mystic. You don't traditionally see this card in Miracles, but BBD playing a couple copies, 2 in his main, 2 in his board. He's got a Batter Skull to search up. You imagine that's what he'll be digging for in a little bit. A little bit of inevitability now, saying, hey, if I get this on the table, it's pretty difficult for you to win. It forces you to have a Swords to Plowshares to get it off of the table, and only temporarily, mind you.
Yeah, not the first time we've seen Brian Braun-Duin, as is his style, take a traditional control deck and add some extra win con to it. Does the same thing in Standard with Esper control. And, I think that if Jacob didn't have a deck list, this would be probably a curveball.
Yeah. Brian going to spin the top on the end of turn. Swords, Brainstorm, and a Scalding Tarn are the cards that he is looking at.
Yeah, Jacob's doing a good job. If he were a control deck, you would say, hey, this is going really well for Jacob. The worry here is he's not the control deck in this matchup.
And I imagine this is exactly how Brian wants the game to go. He's not under any pressure. He can continue to set up, spin top, get his lands all set up, cast a Brainstorm with no pressure on, take a look at a couple copies of Swords of Plowshares, which he can probably put back in this situation. He does have a Jace in his hand that he'd probably like to be able to push through a Force of Will. We'll see if he's able to do that at this point. He's going to play a Scalding Tarn. And again, just patience is the key as he does pass the turn back over to Wilson. Wilson needs to find a way to pressure.
Blue White Miracles is really similar to, in philosophy, to Blue White in Standard right now, in that it really doesn't need to win. It just continues. If it manages to not lose for long enough, it will probably win. He doesn't ever want to fight a counter war over his own spells. If Jacob had started fighting a counter war over the Stoneforge Mystic, Brian probably would have let him counter it. As you see here, he's just building this array of Swords to Plowshares. When you think about it, like, right now, he already has Jacob's next 2 creatures answered, and Jacob hasn't even drawn them yet. It's his 3rd card down at the very best that's relevant.
Yeah. Brian going to take a look here at these cards, leave them on top, of course, with top. He's going to sacrifice a Scalding Tarn. We'll see what land he does want to search up here, but clearly not happy with what he did see for the top 3 cards. So it's going to be an island that BBB does get. And after shuffling and presenting here, we'll see exactly what does happen. See if Brian can find what he's looking for.
Yeah, so first reset, remember he does have another Scalding Tarn, so he can reset again. Now he has 2 blue mana up in basics, so he can start casting all his spells without fear of cards like Wasteland. We'll see what he goes for here. So a new top of his deck, he has, I'll leave another land, which looks like he's going to go ahead and draw. That's one of the things I like about the Miracles deck, because they just use the Divining Top to continue to make land drops.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that aspect. Lets you be able to start playing 2 spells in 1 turn, do a lot with your mana. It's pretty important stuff. Quick update for you guys here as well. Looks like we have Jeffrey Chen up a game here over Richard Shea in the Bug Delver Mirror. Again, Shea going 8-0 in the Legacy portion of the Invitational and making top 8 here, but currently down a game.
Yeah, so in that Bug Delver Mirror, the winner of this will be playing a Bug Delver deck. They don't know the pilot yet, but...
Grim Lavamancer showing up to the party. I suppose that's a clock in some regards.
It's threat number 1. It's going to force a card out of Brian's hand, but Brian has been preparing for this fight for a while.
Yeah, if he wants to take care of it, he certainly can. You see the Swords of Plowshares in Brian's hand right now. He's going to play a Vendilion Click here on Wilson. This may be in response to the Lavamancer. It may not be, but what it's going to do nonetheless is force action from Wilson.
This shows it's another one of those plays that shows strength from Brian. Rather than feeling a need to answer the Lavamancer right away, he's going to throw down a V-Click to look at Jacob's hand, just basically using excess mana because he doesn't feel like he needs to have all his resources to get rid of this Grim Lavamancer. You see Spell Pierce, Force of Will, Umezawa's Jite, and a Lightning Bolt for Jacob. None of these are cards I think that Brian cares about. Force of Will is probably the best card here because it's a 5-mana counter spell, as odd as that sounds. I don't know if he's going to take anything, and he doesn't.
Yeah, he just doesn't care at all, so it's time to spin that top.
all the answers at the ready. You see Brian, a second Divining Top, a Terminus, another, I believe, it's Council's Judgment that he's drawn for the turn as well.
Oh, and for 3, so now it's time to actually start the clock up a little bit here with Vendilion Click. And now here's Swords to take out the Lavamancer.
Yeah, not going to let Jacob have anything here. He's going to expect maybe a hard cast Force of Will from Jacob to protect it. Jacob can try to fight a counter with that Spell Pierce and Force of Will, but Jacob has got to know that he's going to lose that counter war. It's the only reason that Brian let him do it in the first place. He opts not to even fight it.
And also, I think the big deal there is, too, that if Jacob has a counter war over a Swords to Plowshares on a Grim Lavamancer, you got to be thrilled if you're Brian. Yeah, let's battle over this. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme, right? And Jacob has a limited number of counter spells.
The difficulty for Jacob is if he doesn't fight now, he's going to have to fight later. And it's not like things are getting better. Every time Brian spins the top, cracks a fetch land, he's improving his standing. Now, that doesn't mean he's always going to draw better than Jacob. It just means he's usually going to draw better. So what Jacob's going to have to do is, continue to play a game and hope he can outdraw Brian. It's not a good line, but it may be his only line.
It's time to sacrifice a fetch land and search up one. We'll see if it'll be an island or if it will be a tundra here. It looks like Brian's just going to go for another basic. Again, this is one of the really nice things about Miracles is simply you can search up a lot of basics and play around Wasteland.
Yeah, so he has, you see, 5 basics in play. Absolutely right. He's playing around Wasteland. He did shuffle away what looked to be a pretty action-filled top of his deck. I mean, as we've said before, he's looking for counterbalance. That's the way he's going to win. He's top of his deck shows another fetch land, so it's another reset. He does have a Terminus, too.
All pretty good things to look at here for Brian. Again, this game is going exactly the way that he would like it to go. Going to play a Flooded Strand, pass the turn back, 5 action spells in hand. Wilson going to take a draw. You see the Jite, multiple copies of Force of Will now, but Wilson can't find anything to do. He, forced the action with Tree Nemesis early, did so again with Grim Lavamancer. But he's not really doing anything too much right now. Brainstorm will allow him to actually search for things that matter.
Yeah, and he's just going to need to find a lot of action. Brian, despite having the Terminus on top of his deck, is probably going to shuffle it away. He has so much removal in his hand already that I don't think he feels a need to be doing things like Terminus.
And Counterspell's going to take care of the Brainstorm. I actually kind of like that play from Brian. He's got an idea of the contents of Wilson's hand from that Vendilion Click, so he knows that Jacob really doesn't have very much. Additionally, Jacob kind of paused when casting that Brainstorm, not sure if he really wanted to or not, then decided to pull the trigger on it, and Brian very quickly said, I'm countering that. I don't want you to get any deeper in your deck.
Well, the way he loses is if Jacob can vastly improve his holding, and right now he's got Jacob on 1 card a turn, and Brian can probably keep pace with that with Divining Top all day, but if Jacob can draw a Brainstorm, well, that's 3 new cards as he can put away the dead ones. That's probably Jacob's best card on this board.
Stoneforge Mystic here from BBD. Wilson looking at a hand again, 2 copies of Force Will, Spell Pierce, and a Jite. And we might have a little hard cast Force of Will action. Now Brian forcing the action as Jacob's going to sacrifice 2 fetch lands. So yeah, I imagine this will be a hard cast Force of Will. We'll have a little bit of a battle here over Stoneforge Mystic.
Interesting to see if Brian decides to fight. This could be a win con in lieu of a counterbalance. It certainly works. That said, in theory, I don't know if Brian wants to fight over his own spells. He may only want to fight over Jacob's spells. We will see how hard he defends here, and yeah, not at all.
And Brian again, showing a lot of patience, just saying, all right, you're up. Brainstorm the draw here from Wilson, and let's see if we have a fight over this again.
If he could, Brian would fight over it. I don't think he wants to pitch a card to force to fight over it. The reason he counters the last one is he wants to keep a 1-for-1 game going, and Brainstorm kind of breaks that 1-for-1 from Jacob. If you're force willing it, you're not playing a 1-for-1 game anymore, so it's probably just better to let a card like Brainstorm resolve in that situation.
Other thing, too, that Brian knows is, 1, I can't hardcast Force of Will because my opponent has a Force of Will and a Spell Piercing hand. 2, I don't want to break these fetches to hardcast Force of Will. And 3, if he was going to do the alternate cast on it, the only other blue card in his hand is Jace the Mind Sculptor. No thank you.
Yeah, certainly doesn't want to get rid of that. You see a little bit of life in Jacob after that Brainstorm.
Yeah, he finally found something to do, which is a Stoneforge Mystic. Well, we might have a little bit of a battle over this now. You see Brian looking at a Council's Judgment, the Jace, the Force of Will. He might spin the top, maybe get a little bit more information on what he can do, and that's where he's going to start. So he's going to spin with an island, take a look here at a couple of cards. Let's see maybe if we're going to have a little battle here over Stoneforge Mystic. He says, all right, let's sack a fetch land. I go down to 16. I don't like what I see. Does have one more Island Search out, so he'll grab that.
So he doesn't really want to have to face down Stoneforge and Batterskull. What's happening here is that Jacob, with that Brainstorm, actually improved his hand to the point where it can fight with Brian's hand. Now, Jacob's going to have to fight rather quickly because if he doesn't fight over spells now, Brian's going to start topping and fetching again and eventually pulling away. So we'll see what Brian does. He did finally find his counterbalance on that last fetch, though, so he's going to be able to stick that WinCon-esque card down. We'll see if it's able to do enough.
In comes the Mystic. Time to search, of course, Batterskull. Everybody's favorite 4/4 with lifelink.
Yeah, Brian may just try to get rid of the Stoneforge Mystic here instead.
Here's a Ponder. And this is very reminiscent of the match that we saw on the back end of Charlotte, the finals between Majors and Braverman, where neither player really did anything for a while, and Wilson was really trying to find a cantrip. His Brainstorm was able to cantrip, Majors at that point, his Brainstorm was able to cantrip into like a Ponder, another Brainstorm, and then he just started kind of going. And the engine got rolling, and that's what it feels like now with Wilson, where, those turns he was just, draw, go, have a little counter war here, there, Bolts of Vendilion click, and all right, resolve a Brainstorm. All right, I found a Stoneforge Mystic and a Ponder, resolve that, and cast a Ponder, and all right, I can actually start doing some things finally, because that counterbalance is late to the party.
Yeah, Jacob has Stoneforge Batterskull online. I mean, it's still really good. It got there. It's a little late. It's not criminally late. It's still going to have a large effect in the game. But you're right. I mean, what happened here to me just showcases how good Brainstorm is, just how much it was able to bring Jacob back into the game. That's something that none of the other cantrips really can do. And we are going to start fighting over the counterbalance, and Jacob fighting in full. It is Force of Will pitching that Spell Pierce. If Brian wants to fight back, he's going to have to pitch his Jace.
I think given how powerful Counterbalance is in this matchup, that it's worth it. Counterbalance is, it's not the hard lock, of course, but it's pretty close.
And Brian's going to spin top, see if maybe he can have his cake and eat it too. Find another blue spell there.
No one wants to remove Jace to Force of Will.
No, what you want to do is you want to force back and then untap and play Jace.
Yeah.
If you can get that counterbalance in play and then cast Jace, that should get it done.
Let's see if he can find another blue card. You have to imagine he's going to spin top one more time here, getting the Volcanic Island out of his deck, exposing himself a little bit to Wasteland, but he's out of basics to search for.
It'll be interesting if Brian has to make that choice. It'll be interesting to see which one he chooses. He doesn't have to pick, though.
All right, well, he's looking at Force of Will, Counterbalance, and Jace. So this is actually kind of interesting about what card, because now he doesn't actually have to remove a blue card because all these effects are redundant. So you could say, all right, maybe I'll just remove Force of Will. Maybe I'll cast Force of Will moving Jace from my hand. And then the next turn I can just slam down Jace that's on top of my deck. But it looks like he's going to draw a copy of Force of Will and cast Force of Will, removing Force of Will. Okay.
Interested that he chose this line as opposed to if that was a counterbalance, he could have just let the counter war happen and then cast counterbalance again this turn.
Yeah. Now there's swords to get that off of the table. So all these exchanges right now are in favor of Brian. He has a 1-mana spell on top of his deck, do not forget. Wilson going to just leave that mana tap to cast a Batterskull. So that's in play here. Fortunately for Braun-Duin, he does have a copy of Jace in hand as well as Council's Judgment.
Yeah, Jacob with only 2 mana up, that Council's Judgment will be pretty good. Brian knows he's already taken care of at least once he's taken care of the Trireme Nemesis. Remember, that is back in Jacob's hand.
Yep. You see Wilson's hand right now. Force of Will, along with a Spell Pierce. He doesn't look too thrilled about what he sees.
Well, he's going to have to cast Force here, and I don't think he likes that he's running out of cards. I think he knows it's not likely to get there. But letting your opponent have Jason counterbalance, that doesn't seem much better.
Wilson going to take a look at things here.
I think he's wondering whether he can actually let this resolve.
Yeah, and he does, so gonna bounce the germ token. Brian gonna play his top. See if Jacob wants to counter this, and the answer is no. So Saving Forcible and Spell Pierce for a rainy day. Gonna sacrifice the Scalding Tarn.
That's really interesting. I'm interested as to what he wants to fight over. I'm not doubting it. I guess if he has another land and draws it, he can just recast this Batterskull, but maybe he just wants to find a card like Lightning Bolt to take care of Jace. Brian hasn't realized card advantage off the Jace just yet.
Yeah, unfortunately for him, again, Lightning Bolt isn't really going to solve the problem because of the top that's out there with Counterbalance. Also, we know there's another Counterbalance on top of the deck, so even if Brian hiccups and lets Jace die, there's also another Jace on top of the deck. So, I mean, it just doesn't seem like a great situation here for Jacob, all things considered. Brian going to spin a top right now, looking at Terminus in addition to those 2 blue cards, which are Jace and Counterbalance. Brian can untap all those lands, take a draw here, and he's going to brainstorm, so a little bit deeper into the deck we go. 3rd card down to be a Batterskull. So maybe it's time for a little Batterskull war.
Yeah, I mean, if Brian gets to brainstorm a couple more times, it doesn't really matter how he chooses to win this.
Yeah.
He is generating a lot of advantage right now.
No, there's no catching up from that. That's just how it works with Jason. I've always felt if you leave Jason play for, it gets 3 activations in Legacy. That's it. That's literally all it takes. That closes the door. That ends the game.
Yeah, there are some scenarios we can win through a triple activated Jace. True Name Nemesis sometimes is good enough, but you're right. Typically, Jace just seals it on his 3rd activation. Jacob picked up his Batterskull here. Looks like he may try to bait out the top drawing a card. I don't think Brian will take the bait, though.
Yeah, I don't think so either, unless he has a top on... if he has a top on top of his deck, that's one thing, but we'll see. I think Delver... I imagine that Delver is just fine.
He has ways to kill it in his hand. He can let that resolve. He knows there's a Batterskull in Jacob's hand, and he is right now... I don't know if it's he may have a Forcible. It's either Forcible or Counterbalance in those top 3.
Yeah, I'm fairly sure he's floating a Batterskull right now, actually.
Oh, wow. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah,
Yep.
There it is. Yeah, and now Wilson says, that's going to do it for me. And he's going to pick it up and pack it in. Brian Braun-Duin is going to win game number 1 here over Jacob Wilson. Blue-White Miracles up a game here over Blue-White-Red Delver. And we're going to bring it back to the booth there very quickly because it is trivia time. We've been giving away quite a few months of premium this weekend through 2 elimination rounds. We got to do it one more time. So our 3-month trivia giveaway is where we are going to head. Of course, Matthias, you will have the rules, and I will have the first question here in just a moment. But a pretty good game there between the 2 players.
Yeah, I really like... I mean, it was a game where, Brian jumped out to a pretty big lead. And what I like is how Jacob was able to keep the game really close here. Both players played that quite well. I was really impressed with the fact that Jacob managed to keep pressure on the Miracles player on about turn 8.
Yeah.
You don't normally see that. Normally, it's just a cakewalk from there. But Brian being pretty vigilant and, keeping plays like, for example, brainstorming the Batterskull back on top to float it with a recast Batterskull. Brian was very meticulous about shutting all the doors, not letting Jacob creep back into it.
All right, my friend. You'll fire away with the rules, and I'll do, truthfully, everybody, a pretty easy question because it's late at night.
All right, the rules for the contest, they have not changed, same as we've had in our other 2 top 8s. But Cedric's going to ask you a question. If you believe you know the answer, jump onto Twitter and tweet that answer with the hashtag SCG Premium. You can see it on the bottom of your screen. And make sure you tweet at SCG Live. And after the conclusion of all of our top 8 matches, we will randomly select 1 correct answer to receive 3 months of Star City Games Premium. So... send it away.
I said it'd be easy, and if you've been paying attention this weekend, especially to Brian Braun-Duin, then you know that it is easy. In his deck, he does have a couple copies of Stoneforge Mystic, 2 in the main, 2 in the board. He also has some equipment to search for. Now, the question here is, how many copies throughout his 75 does he have of Batterskull? Throughout his 75, how many Batterskulls is Brian playing? You have the answer to that, hashtag the answer SCG Premium. Make sure you are following at SCG Live. And as Matthias said, we will announce the winner at the conclusion of our quarterfinal round. So, again, if you follow BBD, this question is actually pretty easy. As we will head back down to the match here in just a moment, take a look at the sideboards here. You've got Wilson down a game, but I think things changed quite a bit after sideboard.
All right, well, let's go ahead and look at things after sideboard. Jacob Wilson, as you know, his deck is on a lot of ways can morph between control and aggro depending on the matchup. It's one of the advantages of Blue-White Red Delver. He's probably going to want to morph on the aggro side of this matchup because he's not a great deck to be playing control with in this matchup. So looking at his sideboard, yeah, first of all, he has red blasts. He has two pyro blasts. He'll certainly be using those in the matchup. He also has a second copy of True Name Nemesis. Have to assume he's going to use that. On top of that, he could use Meddling Mage. It's not the best here, but it is another threat. Jacob, one of the problems here is that Brian often can just remove Jacob's threats. So I'd be interested to see if he uses something like that. Lastly, he probably will trade out his GT for a Sword of Feast and Famine.
Other side of things, Brian's got a bunch of 1s and 2s, but that's pretty commonplace in Legacy nowadays. An Engineer Explosives, a Pithy Needle, a Batter Skull, a Wear and Tear, Council's Judgment, 2 Meddling Mage, 2 Stoneforge Mystic, a Humility, which I did see in play earlier for Brian against a Sneak and Show opponent, 2 Rest in Peace, and 3 copies of Pyroblast. A lot of good options here.
Yeah, I think this matchup for Brian that started out good gets better after board, actually. He's got a lot of good hate for creature decks. This is it's a blue creature deck, so he's going to have to fight around counterspells. He has 3 Pyroblasts as opposed to just the 2 that Jacob gets. In addition to that, cards like these extra Stoneforge Mystics will be very welcome in the matchup. He has more ways to kill creatures. We could see something like Engineered Explosives, possibly even the Humility you're talking about, just as additional weapons that Brian can use to help get himself to the late game.
And just slow things down.
Absolutely.
And as we've mentioned multiple times, he can win things at his leisure. But his goal is to not die quickly. Now, the big question here is Jacob comfortable playing a longer game? Yeah, again, I don't think a Delver-esque draw is ever going to get the job done in this matchup here for Wilson. It's possible, but it's rather unlikely, I believe. So, what's the big game plan here? It doesn't want to go too long, so I think that favors Brian, just like we saw in that first game. The longer we go, it seems like the better things get for BBD.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about the matchup, I still feel like that last game, that turn 1 Divining Top is so powerful for Brian. If at all possible, Jacob wants to fight over it.
If Jacob had a Force 1 blue card for it, I imagine they would have a battle over that right away, because as you mentioned, it is so important to the deck and how it functions. Again, I feel as though Sensei's Divining Top in Miracles, it's not the best card, or excuse me, not the most powerful card. And I think you could say actually not the best card. I think that, Jace, and
Brainstorm
some other cards,
makes a candidate for it.
Yeah. Those are the best cards in the deck, but this is actually the card that glues everything together. The deck is much different than when it has a top versus when it doesn't.
This is a very Legacy-esque thing to say that you could build a deck of just lands and removal spells and have it be good enough to win. If I were to, in Standard, you have to, for example, glue that together with things like Sphinx's Revelation to bring you from one removal spell to the next one. It's a very Legacy investment to say, yeah, I'll just bridge the gap between these removal spells with a 1-mana artifact that just slowly, that and fetch lands, just finds me what I need whenever.
Quick update for you guys here. Greg Mitchell, the Legacy Open champion from Seattle earlier this year, does win his match 2-0. Bug Delver moving on, taking down Rug Delver. Again, Mitchell has already won one of these Legacy Opens before. Very skilled player from the area I actually live right now. I actually do see him on occasion playing Legacy at the local store. He can really sling them in Legacy.
Yeah, and that's a matchup we thought was going to be good for him. It's a Bug versus Rug matchup. Bug Delver somewhat popularized because it had a pretty good Rug Delver matchup.
Wilson and BBD will be underway here in just a little bit. These players did test together for a Pro Tour, so they are pretty good friends. And they both did play Melirapod at Pro Tour Born of the Gods to some pretty healthy success. Jacob having the most of it, getting runner-up there, second place.
Absolutely. Most of their team ending up on various decks of comfort, but yeah, a lot of Melirapod and pretty good results with it.
7 cards for each player here. And we will be underway in game number 2 shortly. Of course, when we do have any other updates on our matches, we, of course, will let you know. Again, Greg Mitchell is through. And Rich Shea currently down a game to Jeffrey Chen.
All right, so Jacob's on the play here.
Looked like a rather quick mulligan for Wilson. Did not like what he saw.
Yeah, probably nothing that he could hope to keep. Looks like Brian more satisfied with his hand there.
One thing here is just, I'm with you. You take a look at the bracket here and take a look at the decks in the top 8. It seems like Miracle's tournament to lose. It seems like the matchups all are pretty favorable for this deck, assuming that you're under the belief that this deck beats Delver decks, and we got a whole bunch of those.
Yeah, Delver decks are fragile to lots of removal, and Miracles is really up to the task of providing just that.
Brian going to shuffle Wilson's deck here. Again, Wilson taking mulligan down to 6, was not happy with what he saw. BBD pleased with his starting 7, so we'll see if Wilson can find a 6 that he likes. We'll be underway in game number 2 here in just a moment. Again, the winner of this match will play the winner of the Chen versus Shea match. So it's going to be some sort of Delver deck, either bug or bug. All the Delver all the time.
There's a lot of that one-mana guy in this top 8. And
looks like we are underway here in game number 2. You've got a Tundra, and you've got, is it a Delver? It is. All right, so we might try for a Delver draw here. Brian going to draw a card. Looks like he picked up Swords of Plowshares right away. That's what makes these Delver draws actually pretty difficult to put together. They've got so much removal. We don't even mention, of course, those blast effects on the sideboard. Pyroblast can kill a Delver too.
it's so hard for Jacob to run the tempo game plan against Miracles. Rug Delver can sometimes pull it off because Rug Delver has so many weapons to fight a tempo plan with, but Blue-White-Red Delver, I've heard it criticized because it doesn't have a straightforward game plan, and complimented because it can adapt really well. You know, sometimes it plays late, sometimes it tempos, sometimes it aggros. What it lets him do is shift what he needs to do based on the matchup.
I like that versatility. You know, not all decks have that. I actually like the versatility of the deck, being able to shift a little bit, play a longer game and not be afraid to do so because of equipment. You know, Rug Delver, for example, can't do that. That's actually kind of one of the weaknesses of the deck, I think. However, Rug Delver is a deck that doesn't have any interest in playing a long game either. So, you know, if it can capitalize on decks and play that shorter game, that's where it looks deadly. And to be fair, we have seen Rug Delver quite a bit, and it has had a lot of success during its lifespan.
Yeah, and when you talk about that, so there's, right, the advantage is that the Blue-White-Red Delver can shift. The difference is that Blue-White-Red Delver's tempo game is a little worse than Rug's, and to beat Miracles with a tempo game, you have to have a pretty strong one. So we'll see whether or not he can get there.
Counterbalance going to be placed on the stack here. We'll see exactly what does happen to this. Wilson's looking at a daze, I believe, right now. You see a true name over there as well. I think the big question is, do we want to have a fight over this or not?
Yeah. His resources are a little taxed here. We know he wants to, I think, here's his consideration. If he draws a land here, he can land a True Name Nemesis. It's unlikely that Brian, that daze will pretty much get True Name Nemesis on the board. If he dazes the counterbalance, then he's not going to be able to have a third turn True Name Nemesis. And the best thing his hand has going on with it is this sort of Feast and Famine and a True Name. But at the end of the day, he just doesn't want to have to fight through a counterbalance. That card's so powerful.
He's also sacrificing this Delta right now as well. This looks like he knew some of the cards that were on top of his deck, of course, from that Ponder. So Wilson has a game plan in mind, and we'll see if he's able to execute it. Quick update for you guys as well. In our last match, Jonathan Morris, Jason Smith, they're in game number 3. Rug Delver versus Death and Taxes. We'll see what's able to take it down here. As now this is a Stoneforge Mystic. Brian gonna take a look at his hand, says that's good. Time to search up an equipment. Jacob will announce that it is a Batter Skull. Pass it back over to Brian. Brian draws a copy of Wear and Tear.
Could be a little bit of a bait and switch on Jacob's part. Remember, he actually has his second equipment already in his hand. He still may make the Batter Skull, but he could have a surprise sword.
There's a Vendilion Click. Brian says, I want to see right now what you have.
Brian probably hoping he was getting Jacob's only equipment. Stoneforge not completely taken out of the game, though.
You got a Batter Skull, Sword of Feast and Famine, a Force of Will, and a True Nemesis. Actually a pretty good hand, all things considered. Not sure what card Brian's supposed to take here. You take Batter Skull, you leave your opponent with a sword, give him the opportunity to potentially draw a land for True Nemesis. You know, you can make an argument for Force of Will, but the other cards might be more important. And it seems tough to actually say, though, keep them.
Yeah, depends whether or not Brian has a way to answer that True Name. Otherwise, he probably wants to get rid of the True Name. Getting rid of equipment doesn't seem great here. Maybe Batter Skull, certainly not getting rid of Sword. I think True Name's the best bet. Not only does it get rid of a really potential threat, but it also disables that Force of Will, possibly.
Force of Will is back on. Ponder was the draw. Tundra is the follow-up.
Good set of draws from Jacob. He can continue to develop his mana base with Ponder, and he can go ahead, if he wants to, and put that Batter Skull into play.
Decisions here for the young master. Looks like he's going to begin with the Ponder.
Yeah, when you do look at Brian's hand, he's got a lot of answers. He's got that Wear and Tear. He's got straight counter spell in his hand. And
Wilson does not like what he sees. Shuffles away a Wear and Tear among others.
yeah, a great move. There was a Stoneforge Mystic in there too. Second one's not always bad, but when you have both equipment in your hand, he doesn't really need a second one.
Mystery cards, Force Will. Gonna be able to continuously defend himself. Just going to play a Tundra and passing the turn back over to Braun-Duin.
Yeah, at least for him it was a blue card. That's probably what he wanted. Now he has his Force of Will online again. The fact that it's a blue card without much text, I mean, he's not really going to use 2 forces in this matchup.
Yeah, it's
so
rare.
It's just a blue card, but that's still fine by him.
We're going to kick it off with a Brainstorm. So 1 is a Flooded Strand, 2 is a Top, and 3 is a Stoneforge Mystic.
Be interesting to see whether or not Jacob Wilson wants to fight over this Divining Top. I don't know if he can afford to do it is a concern for him. You know, Brian could play a 4th land, play Divining Top with Counterspell up. That's a lot of mana. Jacob, it's a counterspell that Jacob wouldn't expect to win. That said, he probably doesn't want Brian getting a top either, so he's might be stuck in a hard place here.
Pretty tough Brainstorm here for Brian. A lot of good cards in his hand. Got a real decision to make here. Not sure if he's found a land here or not. Might be putting back an island as the first card, but he's going to think this one through quite a bit as he does put a couple of lands back, it looks like. Top is probably the most important card again because that's what makes the engine go. So Brian very cautiously putting 2 cards back, resolving that Brainstorm. Going to slide the lands over. Oftentimes means he's got another one to play. And there's a Flooded Strand, and now there's a Top. With the ability to play around Spell Pierce at this point. Again, we know Wilson has Force of Will and a blue card. Are we going to have a fight over this?
Yeah, Brian plays a land to both play around Spell Pierce and to represent his own Counterspell. It looks like this Top's going to work. One concern Brian has to have is it does not look like he will necessarily win the fight over Batterskull here. If he even fights it at all.
Yeah. Wilson figuring out what equipment to put into play, perhaps. Decisions.
It's actually a close choice for him. Batterskull is usually what you put into play. However, Stoneforge Mystic could swing through this Vendilion Click with a sword on it. It's a high-risk play if he wants to go for Feast and Famine, but if it works, it certainly will pay for itself.
Oh. Jacob gonna go with sword.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, this to me shows actually a line of like the Jacob's not happy with the board. Batterskull is the safe play. Sword of Feast and Famine is this play which you don't expect to have work, but if it does work, it can pull you back into a game. And I feel like that's what he did here. He's throwing up the long pass.
Wilson gonna equip the sword right now. You saw his draw was a Force of Will. Vendilion Click gonna get in front here. Gonna bite the dust right away. Brian, see if he wants to fire off maybe this Wear and Tear. Now the damage is already on Stoneforge Mystic.
Yeah, good discipline by Brian here. He's going to force Jacob to fight over the spell if Jacob wasn't already planning to do it. If Jacob does not force this artifact destruction spell, the Wear half, then he's going to lose both the sword and the Stoneforge, as the Stoneforge, as you said, has 3 damage.
Brian going to go searching for his other volcanic island here. So he's opening himself up to Wasteland a little bit right now, but Wilson doesn't have any. And I think if Wilson were to draw Wasteland, he would probably take down that Tundra instead and cut off a little bit of the white mana here of BBD.
Yeah, red really a light splash in his deck. As you said there, he's just blue-white, and that's not the fact that the red cards come out of the board.
Brian going to fire off Wear and Tear at this sword. Wilson, do you want to Force of Will that? Looks like the answer feels like a reluctant yes. So there is Force of Will removing Force of Will.
Yeah, I mean, he has to answer it. He
think
loses
so.
his whole board if he doesn't.
So Wear and Tear is countered. Braun-Duin going to draw a card. Let's see if he wants to top the upkeep. Maybe try to find a Terminus, for example. Would be pretty good in this situation.
Yeah, Brian under a little bit of pressure here. He doesn't want to start taking hits off that Sword of Feast and Famine.
3 Swords Plowshares. The big one.
Done and done. So an answer to the Stoneforge Mystic and actually also an answer to the Batterskull right now. Jacob can't cast it without the help of the 1/2.
The important thing here, too, is that Brian knows one of the cards in hand is a Batterskull. So he's got to imagine that this sword is good to go. And he's going to fire this off right now while still being able to play around Spell Pierce to take care of Stoneforge Mystic. Pro-black, pro-green, pretty good, but not pro-white.
Yeah, he already knows it can't be forced, can't be spell pierced, can't be pyroblasted. There's not actually a card that Jacob has that would stop that swords.
Now there's Stoneforge Mystic. Time to go get a Batterskull. Pass the turn back over to Wilson. Wilson draws a card. It's Daze. That's a little late to the party.
Yeah, Day's not going to help too much here. It is a blue card for Force Will, but Jacob doesn't have any threat of his own. And you can just feel this Batterskull getting ready to go to work.
Yeah. The tide is turning here towards Braun-Duin. He's going to untap. He'll be moving to take a draw. Not going to spin the top this go around.
All right. He said land on there. Brian's just going to go ahead and pass back the turn. Not a care.
Pyroblast the draw here from Wilson. Some really, really good reactive cards. I think Brian going to consider here activating Stoneforge Mystic.
If Jacob still had a Stoneforge or a Delver in play, his hand would be real good. And this is the difficulty of a Delver in the matchup, is that his creatures are all gone. So these cards that are great when you're ahead, are used on the defensive. They're okay there, but it's just not what his deck wants to be doing.
So Brian cast a Vendilion Click there instead of putting Batterskull into play. And that play may look a little bit strange, but I also think I understand it. One, he could be a little bit scared of Vendilion Click, taking the equipment in response to the activation. Two, he would open it up to Wear and Tear if Wilson has it. And he can prevent at least prevent Wear and Tear if he just plays another land.
Yeah. And because that Divining Top, Brian has all the time in the world here. If he just sits around, his draws will eventually get better, not to mention the fact that he's got a counterbalance.
I imagine Wilson is probably forced into taking care of this, no pun intended. It's just late and I'm tired.
I mean, he's got to fight over it, and this is, like you said, he's getting rid of more of his hand, just left with 3 lands and a couple of artifacts.
Yep, and Wilson knows, all right, Force of Will, removing days. Brian knows the last card in my hand now is a Batterskull. And Brian says, all right, well, my counterbalance is gone, but again, he's got to like his position right now. Wilson, maybe untapping just a moment. I think Brian may be considering activating Stoneforge Mystic right now so that Vendilion Click doesn't show up and then he opens himself up to Wear and Tear. But again, he might be okay with that. And yeah, he's going to activate Stoneforge now. Token's going to come in, pass the turn back over to Wilson. Wilson can blow him out with the draw of Wear and Tear, but it was just a Spell Pierce. So Brian's going to untap everything. And we may see him spin the top right now, and we do. Brian getting into the driver's seat now.
Yeah, so he didn't get the counterbalance, but he got all of Jacob's cards. And with Divining Top still producing more advantage, he's ahead on the board, he's ahead in the hand, he's ahead on drawing more cards. And it looks like he'll be heading for a semifinals matchup against Bug Delver.
Yeah, it's looking pretty good here for Brian. He is a little bit ahead. There is a Wasteland from Wilson. Brian going to spin the top right now. But Wilson has a lot of reactive spells at this point.
All right, so Wasteland the draw. Yeah, he's building up to 5 mana. At 5 mana, he can cast his own Batterskull. That's not a solution yet, but it gives him something to play. See right now, BBD just developing his mana, hitting for damage.
Yeah, it's time for 5 more. Wilson going to draw a card.
He's forcing action from Jacob. Brian will still have to answer all the creatures here. Remember, if Jacob gets something like a Delver of Secrets, he'll be able to put the sword on it. It'll get a pro-black, so he will have protection from that Germ token. Then again, Brian can always move a Batterskull over to Stoneforge Mystic. Even if Jacob gets that defense going, Brian has a lot of ways to shut it down.
Brian going to untap here and take a draw. Going to play an Arid Mesa to be able to clear his top if he'd like. And in we go yet again. So 5 more damage are going to come across. I believe Wilson is at 5 and Braun-Duin should be at 33, but please confirm.
All right, and we have Vendilion Click from Jacob. So he does have a creature. He may be able to stick a sword on one. We'll see whether he wants to ship a card out of his own hand or go up Brian's. Not going to get the chance.
Nope. Wilson going to reluctantly put that in the bin. Wilson going to draw a card. Does he find anything that's going to help him? It's a Pyroblast and an extension of the hand. Brian Braun-Duin is going to win this match over Pro Tour runner-up Jacob Wilson. Blue White Miracles moving on, taking down Blue White Red Delver in very, very impressive fashion. A very well-played match by Brian.
Yep, solid performance there, showing how Blue White Miracles rather dismantles a Blue White Red Delver deck. The fact that the Delver deck only plays 11 creatures. I mean, that sounds, if you're a deck with a lot of board control, that sounds like a great matchup.